Hey CDA, and welcome back to my Satisfactory 1.0 Masterclass. In each episode I'll give you one specific goal to work towards that you should ideally be able to complete in 1 or 2 sessions. At this point you should have completed phase 3, which means that not only are you now in something like the top 95% of the players, because apparently a lot of people don't get this far, but you also have a decent looking space station. But more to the point, that means that you can now unlock bauxite refinement, which allows you to make aluminum. Yay! It's probably one of the recipes that drives people most crazy. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to build ourselves an aluminum factory. Now, as always, I'm going to go through this step by step, but if you want to skip ahead or at least look at what buildings I'm using and what is connected to what, make sure you check out the description below where there's a link to the planner. Now, I am going to assume that you did what I suggested in the previous episode, and that is basically exploring, get yourself plenty of hard drives, immersive spheres and summer sloops, so that you can use all the fun stuff in this game. At this point, it's pretty safe to say we're getting somewhere close to the end game, so you might as well start upgrading your depot if you haven't done so already, because all of these upgrades are going to be pretty useful to make your building life a lot easier and quicker. I'm also going to assume that you set up plenty of power. You can either build another fuel station like we've done before, or you can build a power augmenter that is going to give your power a huge boost, or you should probably be doing all of these things, build some geothermals and have some batteries to make sure you are making the most out of them. If you haven't done so, this is also the moment you might want to start working on aluminum alternates, because there actually is a ton of different ways to make aluminum, just to confuse people even further, I guess. But depending on what you want to achieve, those recipes are actually all pretty useful. Now, let me walk you through the base process of making alumina before we talk about the alternates. So, first of all, you take some bauxite and some water and you turn that into alumina solution and a little bit of silica. Now, this alumina solution is then going to be turned into aluminum scraps with a little bit of coal added to that. Now, you're also going to get water as a byproduct, so you can actually use this water in the first step where you're making the alumina. So you don't need to feed only new water to the system. There is a water loss in this process, but you can kind of feed it back. But that's also something that gets really messy and confusing if you don't know what you're doing. Now, in the third step, then you're making that scrap into the aluminum ingots. Now, you're going to need to add some silica to that. Luckily, we were already making some silica in the first step, so you can use that silica to feed the aluminum ingot production as well. Now, you're going to then turn the ingots into either aluminum sheets or into aluminum casings. That's pretty straightforward, but up to that point, you've already done several steps to just get those ingots up and running. Now, pretty much all the alumina alternates are going to be useful. For example, the sloppy alumina allows you to not only make more aluminum from the same bauxite, but it also removes the silicon production as a side product. Now, losing the silicon production from the solution alternate is potentially a downside, but if you also take the pure aluminum ingot recipe, you actually don't need any silicon production anymore in your entire factory when making aluminum. So you can actually simplify the recipe quite a bit, and you only sacrifice about 10% of the production as a result. You could actually regain the lost production by using the electrode aluminum scrap alternate, but then you need to add petroleum coke to the recipe, which is quite annoying to make and hard to balance, so it's not my personal favorite. Just to make sure you can follow along, and actually because I kind of like the default recipes to begin with, I am just going to use the default recipes for the solution, the scrap, the ingots, as well as the sheets. Now, I am actually going to use one alternate, and that is for the aluminum casing. The all-clad casing alternate is actually really efficient because you get a little bit more casings out of your ingots just by adding in a little bit of copper. We have plenty of copper to go around, so that's almost free. Now then, the real question is, where are we going to be putting our factory? Because we need some bauxite, and there's plenty of that over here on the platform, as you can see. We're also going to need some coal, and we're going to need quartz, and we're going to need water. So basically, it doesn't matter really where we place the factory. If we want to have it somewhere close by, we're going to have to bring in a lot of resources. Now, I'm actually liking this spot over here because it has easy access to water. It's close to all of our other factories. And on top of that, we can easily use some trains to get those resources in. So I kind of like the look of this alcove over here to build the factory. Not only is it very close to everything we already have, as you can see, this direction, this path over here actually leads to a lot of the resources we need. It also leads up here to the plateau. So having a train run there is going to be very useful in the future, I believe, as well. I'm just planning this out as I go, so I don't have like a total plan for the entire game just yet, but I think this should work out just fine. I'm also going to raise the logistics floor a little bit compared to this factory over here, because I want to kind of align it with this rock formation over here, so we can put the factory on top of that and have the train run actually below the factory. And as a bonus, we get to do this. Okay, so I've started out with a platform, so I have an idea of where I'm going to be building my factory and what room I have to work with, and it's actually turning out a little bit higher than I expected, mostly because this pillar over here is sloped up slightly, so you need to start building from the highest peak in order to avoid getting into, well, clipping issues with the ground. I also built a bridge. Don't worry, the entire thing is floating. We're going to fix that. We're going to make it look pretty. But actually, I don't mind the fact that this is up a little higher. It kind of fits with the whole mountain thing we have going on here. And it leaves plenty of space for the train to run underneath as well. Now remember, this is not actually the logistics floor. This is what we're going to be placing the logistics floor on using the blueprints I showed you in one of the previous episodes. I'm going to start out with a section of copper smelters. We're only going to need 7 and there's 8 in the blueprint, but well, we can just underclock 2 of them. And I'm putting them in the corner over here because we're actually going to use a copper node that is hiding in the corner over there. Then I'm going to use some empty platform blueprints in order to make the platform that this is standing on 5 by 5. Because that allows me to put a nice section of constructors nicely aligned with everything else next to that. Now we're only going to need 6 constructors here actually, so we're going to again underclock a couple of them. But these constructors are actually going to be making quartz crystal. Now you might be thinking, we don't actually need quartz crystal for this build, do we? Well, no, you're actually completely right, but we are going to need that later, and we are going to be bringing in a whole lot of quartz to be processed here anyway, so we might as well take advantage of that while we're at it. Then, using the awesomeness of the blueprint mode, I'm once again going to leave myself a little bit of space, and then I'm going to once again add in a couple of constructors. This time around I am going to put in a total of 12 constructors over here, at least that's the goal. We're going to add in a couple more because there's 8 of them in my blueprint, but as you can see, this is super fast building your factory like this. Almost feels like cheating, doesn't it, when you do it like this? Well, it's not, because it's going to drive you nuts setting this all up manually, and using these blueprints is making your life a lot easier, trust me. Now, we are just going to do a quick recap, because this is actually going to go pretty fast. We have a total of 7 smelters making copper ingots, so underclock 2 of them in the set of 8 to 50%, and you have the equivalent of 7. Then we are going to need 5.6 constructors making quartz crystal. You don't want any more because we need all the other rock quartz for the silica. That means that you can underclock several of them, because we have 8 of them here in the corner, to the amount that leads up to 5.6. Then we need a total of 12 constructors making silica. Again, we have 16 over here, so we can underclock a couple of them on each side in such a way that we get to a total of 12. It doesn't really matter how you underclock the machines, but I do recommend splitting the underclock machines, at least for the silica, to both sides, so you can easily fit the 450 silica that we're going to be producing here between these 2 sections, and then they fit each on a Mark III belt. Now again, I'm going to leave myself some room between these different sections, and I'm not going to repeat that every single time. Just assume that I'm leaving at least one wide walkway in between every section from now on. Now for the next 4 pieces, you can actually kind of shift them around depending on what you prefer in terms of the logistical order, but I think this way makes sense. So first of all, I have 6 foundries here that are going to make the ingots, the aluminum ingots. We actually need about 8 of them, so I'm going to overclock 2 of them by 100% to get the desired result, because I can only fit 6 in a blueprint. Then next to that, there's a whole bunch of assemblers. There's 8 in total. I'm actually going to use 1 row to make the all-clad casing, using the alternate for that. And we only need about 2 assemblers doing that in that row. So you can actually underclock them so that each assembler is producing exactly 60 units, so 240 in total. And then that takes care of all the casings that we need for now. Then these front row is going to be producing the aluminum sheets with just the default recipe. And I'm going to overclock one of those assemblers with 100%, so we get a total of 5 assemblers, or at least the equivalent of that, making the sheets. That should come up to about 150 per minute. Keep in mind that if you want to underclock, you can either type in the percentage or you can just type in whatever number of units you want. So again, in this case, the outlet casing is set to 60. Typing in this number would be really annoying, so you can just adjust this to whatever you want and it will do the math for you. Across from the foundries, we're going to need some refineries to make the scrap. Now actually these refineries pump out scrap at a ridiculous rate, so I'm actually going to underclock them I should say, to 50%. So we have the equivalent of about 2 of them here, but I'm still going to place all 4 of them, mostly to make sure everything aligns nicely. And I'm also going to color the pipes, so I know actually what's supposed to go where. So we have the aluminum solution going in with white, and then we have water coming out with the blue over here. And then finally we're going to need the actual solution to be produced in these refineries, and we actually need 4 of them, so no underclocking or overclocking this time around. We have the solution coming out on one side and water and bauxite going in the other side. Now this was the easy part. Now we have actually all the machines we need. We have most of the power infrastructure already in place as well. But now we actually need to hook everything up. And now most of this is pretty straightforward, just connect A to B and B to C. There's a couple of things that I want to highlight here. Generally speaking, it's best to input fluids slightly from above like I'm showing you over here. Now you don't need to do it, it works fine if you do it from below, but it will be a little bit less reliable than when you do it from above. Now the main problem that people run into is the fact that we're actually producing water as a side product, which is not easy to get rid of. So of course what you want to do is actually feed the water back into your factory when you're making the solution, because this actually requires water. However, the water that you get from the scrap production is not going to be enough to do all your solution production. So you actually do need to bring in some water from the outside. Now, in order to make sure that the water you bring into your factory is not the water that's being prioritized, otherwise the entire factory might come to a standstill, you're going to want to combine those different pipes in a way that looks something like this. You want to feed the outside water, so the water coming from the pumps, on the top of a line like this. So this bottom line is the line coming from within your factory, and then the top line is the one that is actually coming from the outside. Now, the way this works in the game, and don't ask me why because I don't fully understand the logic, but I do know that it works, is that the lower pipes will be prioritized over the ones that are on top. So basically this water will be consumed first, and this water will only be brought in if there's additional space for the water to fit in your refineries. Just as a side note, you do want to make sure you're using Mark II pipelines for most of this actually, because otherwise you won't be able to have enough throughput through your pipes in order to get everything to your factory where it belongs. And this is back in tier 6, so you should have no problem unlocking this in case you haven't done so yet. Also keep in mind that the aluminum scrap facility along with several others are actually producing quite a bit of stuff, so you're going to need to use several belts in order to get some stuff from A to B, as well as ideally using Mark IV belts just to make your life easier and not have to think too much about what goes on what belt. Anyway, connecting up the factory isn't too difficult. Make sure you set up some dimensional depots for the silica, the quartz, the casings and the sheets, because that's the new items that we're actually producing here. And you might also want to make sure those casings and sheets can go into a sink, because we're going to be producing way more than we need for a little while. Okay, so let's start with some of the easy things. We need some water. We need 4 pumps to be exact, and make sure you add in plenty of pumps to make sure the water can actually go all the way up to the factory. Now the Mark II pumps do help with that, because they actually give a head lift of about 60 meters, I believe. So that's plenty to get up to the height we need them to. The copper is also nearby. We can just get that from over here in the corner. We only need about 210, so 1 pure node will be sufficient. For the bauxite, we're going to go up the mountain all the way over there, because we are going for this pure node, and we're going to be overclocking that, so we get actually 480 bauxite per minute from this single node. I just like using as few nodes as I can, and that's going to supply the entire factory with enough bauxite to do everything we want. As a side note, once you get up here, actually seeing your entire factory at a glance, super awesome. With that, we have the solution in production, we have the silica, or at least some silica in production, and we also have the copper in production. Now we're just going to need coal and some more silica on top of that. Which brings me back to something I've mentioned quite a while ago in this episode now, the trains. I still think we can run the train below here. We do need to be a little bit careful about this pillar over here, and again, this thing is not done yet. We will make it look better. But the train itself will probably continue onwards in this direction at some point, maybe. So if I build the train station either here or somewhere over here, I'll just need to figure out with that. I can make sure the coal can go into this facility over here and the silica can go into this facility over there. So yeah, just pretty much in the middle over here is going to be just fine. Okay, so how about this? Nice little station with 4 wagons. We can have 2 wagons coming in with coal and 2 wagons coming in with quartz, and that should be more than enough. It's probably actually already overkill, but I might as well make the train a little bit larger if I have it driving up and down all the time. Check out my previous video if you're in any way confused about how you actually build trains. As you can see, I'm having the storage units attached to that as well. And I'm just actually probably not going to put foundations under my train because that's a whole lot of work to do. And it doesn't always necessarily look all that well as long as you're not running your trains in the air. I actually think that just the train tracks across the terrain looks pretty good. If you want to lay somewhat natural tracks, just curve around with the train a little bit. Try to avoid going like uphill where it's not logical to do so, and your trains will look pretty realistic actually. Anyway, so if you are playing along, then we're going to go into this cave right behind our facility. So this is the facility over here. We're going to go into this cave next to the water down below. Now there's going to be things like spiders and stuff like that in there, so make sure you're armed if you're playing with creatures on hostile. But on the other side of the cavern you'll find some coal. So right when you leave the cave you'll find a pure node, and of course if you're playing somewhere else in the world you're just going to need a pure node as well, or at least the equivalent of that, because we need about 240 coal per minute for the factory that we just built. I also have a little station over here again with 2 freight carts collecting the coal, and then there's 2 empty station parts so that the front 2 carts are actually going to be able to be loaded with something different, namely the quartz. Now, as a side note, I used to be really anti-train because honestly there's nothing a train can do that you can't just do with belts, and belts do it for free, at least they don't cost any power. But it's so much faster to set this up, it's not even in the same ballpark, and also having the power come along with you is just super convenient. So yeah, I'm sold on trains by now, and I do think they're actually really cool when you see them driving around. So we're going to need about 480 crystal quartz, and well, it's actually right around the corner, and it's actually closer than I thought it was going to be just looking at the map, because I just built the other station to collect it, and well, as you can see, this is a bit too close together for my liking. So I'm actually going to remove the second station to save some power and just add a couple more freight platforms to this one, and then get a belt to run over here instead. Alrighty, power up, crystal coming in. And I upgraded the station to collect all of that stuff. Then all I need is a train with 4 wagons and 2 locomotives, 1 on each side. Add the stations, turn on the self-driving, and there we go. Also, don't forget to actually set your station to load and unload at the proper locations, because otherwise nothing is going to arrive. Not entirely sure why my train is glowing blue, but at least the resources are coming in. I hooked everything up, and that should mean that we now have the aluminum in production. And there you go, we have sheets, we have casings, basically we have everything we need to unlock, well, a lot of other things actually on the technology tree now. Now all I need to do is make this look slightly better than it does currently. How about this? Nothing special, just a couple of walls and a couple of linings around the edges. Some railings on the ramps really make them look good as well, and it nicely integrates into the rest of my factory. And I actually also really like how the gates look if you use them with some open walls. And well, honestly, this logistics floor looks pretty clean now we're using the blueprints and we don't have too many belts clipping. Thanks to the blueprints and leaving myself some room to get around, the factory is really easy to get around and also still looks extremely organized, so it has that going for it. And I also think it looks pretty neat and organized from the top. So let me walk you through it just once more. So we have the copper in the back, we have some crystal in the back as well. This is completely optional. And we're making the silica over here, we're making the ingots over here, we're making the solution here, and transporting most of that into this build over here that is making the scraps. And then finally we have the assemblers over here making the sheets and the casings. All in all, pretty straightforward. It still costs you quite a bit of time to build, mostly actually to get the resources in to connect everything up, but using the blueprints I've shown you before, or a version of that you made yourself, because honestly, like I said before in the comments, they are not complicated at all. It's pretty straightforward to make. There's nothing special going on, it's just something to save you a lot of time. And there we go, this is one of the most frustrating builds in the game completely done. I hope you found it useful. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.